soon return.
Yes, Lord.
As we hold to this assurance, Spirit come, 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 pour it out, let your love run over, give it out, let your glory fill this house, pour it out, let your love run over, give it out, let your glory fill this
Oh, let's just lift our hands and say, Lord, you are here to fill us, to strengthen us. We thank you, Lord, that you are the one who enables us. Come, Holy Spirit, we welcome you here. Every heart, fill us, strengthen us, Lord. Every heart, Lord. Thank you, God, for your presence and your power here. Pray for the empty places to be filled. Just as we're just going to hear what the Spirit is saying to us through Andrew here. Just hear this.
When Samuel comes to anoint Saul as the chosen king of Israel, Saul's been looking for some donkeys that his father had lost. And it was really what God needed to bring him to a place where he connected with the Word of God to appoint him as a leader. And we all end up where we are with the capacity to lead for different reasons. We might be after some donkeys, but God comes and he affirms us and he says, you're able to lead. And Samuel says to Saul, and to whom is all the desire of Israel turned, if not to you and your whole family line? And it's been a couple of weeks where things that people have looked to for guidance and for leadership, politicians, movie directors, the confidence has fallen. And I believe God is here today saying to us that our nation and our city are looking for leadership. They are looking to people like you and me. And if you're anything like me, you often feel ill-equipped. You don't feel capable. Just as Saul said, but am I not a Benjaminite from the smallest tribe of Israel? And is not my clan the least of all the clans of the tribe of Benjamin? Why do you say such a thing to me? And many times as I've reflected on God's call to leadership, why have you said this to me? Why have you called me? Who am I to lead? But I believe God is here today affirming Him in you enables you to lead. As Dan spoke right at the beginning of today. That for all the truth we're going to hear, and for all the equipping we're going to get today, that it's Christ in us that enables us. That is our confidence and our ability to lead. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you for your calling upon our lives. Thank you that as you said in 1 Corinthians 1:27, that not many of us were of noble standing, not many of us were influential when you called us. But yet you did, Lord. And we lift our eyes up to you today in faith and confidence that greater are you in us, Lord. And Lord, that we can do what you've called us to do, that you have enabled us, and that you are here today by your Holy Spirit to empower us afresh, Lord. And we start this day looking up to you. We open our hearts wide to you. We thank you that you pour out into our spirits a confidence and a revelation again that we are enabled because of you in us, that you find us available and willing to serve in your strength, Lord. In Jesus' name.
Wow. Let's honor our God, our Lord Jesus Christ. Give him a big hand of applause. Everybody who helped set this up from early this morning and all the teams serving today. Come on, can we give them a hand as well? Hey, is there anyone here from the Slough congregation? The Wild Wild West. Anyone here from Stratford? It's wilder in the east. Anyone here from Hammersmith? And fantastic to have you. We have Pastor John Lynn here from Paris. Those of you who are watching online, we've got loads of people watching online from all over the place. I think we've got Belfast, we've got Dublin, we've got Edinburgh. And hey, if you guys, welcome all of you who are watching online. And if you are watching, send us a message from where you're watching and send us any questions you've got. So anyway, welcome to, let's give the guys watching online a hand as well. Anyway, take a seat, make yourself comfortable.
Belgium as well. Belgium as well.
Oh, Belgium is watching, all right. But do let us know and we'll welcome you later if you're from any other place. We'd love to have you. Yeah, it's going to be a great day of equipping. Our world desperately needs leaders, right? The church needs leaders. And we say, here we are, Lord. You have some notes. Just to give some order here, we have some notes. You'll see the schedule over there. We're going to follow that. But it is my great, great privilege to welcome Pastor Steve Murrell with us today as our speaker and our equipper today. Steve is the current president of Every Nation. That is about the most awesome title you could have on this planet. But Pastor Steve is one of the 3 founders of the Every Nation family. And has an incredible story of how God has used him across the world. He's the author of a few really impacting books that really speak to the very heart of who we are as a movement. His Wiki Church book, his 100 Years From Now book, his Multiplication Challenge book recently. And it is a real honor to have Steve with us today. So we're going to have 4 Power Pack sessions today. Are you ready? Fantastic. Pastor Steve, without any further ado, I'm going to welcome you up here, and let's give Pastor Steve Murrell a hand.
Thank you. I am glad to be here. I'm trying to make sure I stand in the right place. I think the people watching online only saw a body with no head because of where you were standing, perhaps. I was shown a video, so do I have a head, those online? All right. Right here, no head, right? Cuts it off right here? Okay, that's the better part anyway. We're going to stand here, all you millions watching online. All the millions watching online. Good to see you. We'll try to stand, we'll try to stand in the right. That head, okay. All right. Okay, Mr. Director, can we see? This is good. Yes, it's an international sign of you're standing in the right place. All right, I am really honored to be here in what has been reputed to be the greatest city in the world. I don't know if that is an official London slogan or Pastor Wolfie, did you make that up?
It came from heaven.
It's a prophetic statement that Pastor Wolfie makes all over the world. And actually, I think London should take that as its official motto. I think a pastor should label a city like that. So seriously, I really do appreciate Pastor Wolfie's love for this city. And everywhere he goes, whether it's in Asia, North America, Africa, anytime he mentions London, he cannot say the word London without saying the greatest city in the world. And I really believe we should love the city God's called us to. I really believe we should have that kind of heart for the city. If you're here for the rest of your life, you should have that attitude. If you're only temporary, you're a student, you're studying, and eventually you'll go somewhere else, then I think you should also have that attitude to love your city and love the city God's called you to and pour your life into it, whether it's permanent or whether it's temporary. My wife and I were talking last night about Pastor Wolfie and Allie and how encouraged we are every time we get around them. In fact, Franz picked me up after we were going up and down the elevators looking for each other. There's 2 lobbies. Actually, there's 3 lobbies in the hotel, and I think we were rooming around all 3 of them and playing. It was like playing hide and seek with my 4-year-old granddaughter. We eventually found each other, and on the way over here, Franz was talking to me about the same thing my wife and I were talking about last night. We were talking about you behind your backs last night, about how encouraged we always are, and then he started in on that, what people of faith you guys are. and how your faith inspires him. It's inspired us. And I just want to say that as we talk about leadership today, you have two of the greatest leaders you could ever want to work with right here in Wolfie and Alley, because they are faithful to the call. And we could end this whole day with just saying this. Here's what they are. They're faithful to the call of God, and they're filled with faith as they approach the task that God's given them. Okay, that's it. That's what you need to do as leaders. Okay, my work is done here. If we'll just be faithful to the call and be filled with faith every day when we approach the task God has for us. And Wolfie and Allie, thank you for being that. Thank you for modeling that. Thank you for displaying that. And no matter how big the mountain is, approaching it with faith. Whether it's a hill or a mountain or a valley, approaching it with faith. And your faith is contagious. And I really thank God for your leadership, and I thank God for your friendship. You've refreshed us. All right.
Thank you.
Let me explain what we're going to try to do today. Each session will start with a question that you're going to take a few minutes and discuss with the people sitting around you. So look around, to your right, to your left, in front of you, behind you. You're going to have to talk to those people today. It's not just going to be me talking all day. You're going to have to talk to them, but not right now. And then each session will close with you talking to those people again with another question. And I think the questions are in your notes. And the questions are designed to force you or help you deal with some of the leadership topics verbally by getting your thoughts together and expressing them to someone else. But before we do that, I want to tell you sort of the framework of what we're going to do. If you have a Bible, would you turn to Psalm 78? Have you ever heard that question about are leaders born or made? And do we have a time clock somewhere? Is there or am I responsible for that myself? All right, we'll do it this way.
Steve will get one up there.
Yeah, all right, there we go. Okay, that would help me if there's someone that had an iPad with a countdown or something. All right, you've heard the question, are leaders made or are leaders born? You're looking at a natural-born follower in front of you. There's nothing in me that wants to lead. There's nothing in me that has ever aspired to lead. There's nothing in me that has ever wanted to lead. I much prefer the back row to the front row. I much prefer keeping my mouth shut to having to speak up. Here's how it's worked with me. Here's how leadership has worked. You imagine the old cartoon with people lined up, and then the leader says, everyone who wants to lead, take a step forward. I never took a step forward, but basically everybody else stepped backwards, and I found myself standing there. Now, you may be the opposite. You may be more biblical in that aspiring to leadership is called a godly thing. It's a good thing. That's never been my case. I've been a somewhat reluctant leader and found myself in leadership positions that I didn't actually pursue. Either way, whether you're a reluctant leader or whether you're an aggressive leader, I hope what we're going to talk about today will help you be better at whichever one you find yourself in. Here's the scripture that we're going to look back to every single session, and every single leadership situation and leadership issue is going to come down to what this scripture describes. So let's look at Psalm 78, 3 verses, 70, 71, and 72. And I'm reading from the ESV. My church that I've been privileged to be a part of for so long is called Victory. And so ESV stands for Essential Sa Victory. Okay? Ask a Filipino. We used to use the NIV that was necessary in Victory, but we've scrapped that. We're all ESV now. Here we go, verse 70. He chose David, his servant, and took him from the sheepfolds, from following the nursing ewes. He brought him to shepherd Jacob, his people, Israel, his inheritance. With upright heart he shepherded them and guided them with skillful hand. Now, verse 70 says God chose, or God called David. Verse 71 says God promoted David. And so you see that leadership starts with God. God called David. It doesn't matter where you start. David started in the sheepfold. He started out there in an insignificant nowhere place. Where you start does not matter. What matters is that you embrace and acknowledge and accept the call of God on your life. So God called David, and God's calling on your life has nothing to do with where you started. He does not care. In fact, he often loves to take the foolish and the lowly and the nothings of the world and put them in great positions so that it has to be acknowledged that God did that. And that was the case of David. Even his family, the closest to David, didn't see any leadership potential in his life. When the prophet was coming looking for the next leader and asked Jesse, David's dad, line up your sons, I think it's one of yours, he lined up everybody in the family except David. Even his mom and dad saw zero leadership potential. Doesn't matter where you start. God called it. Verse 71, God promoted from the sheep to people, from leading sheep to leading people. And God's ultimate promotion is always when he puts you in a position to lead people. Because people are God's most treasured possessions. Not organizations, not systems, not programs, not classes, people. And if God has put you in a place to lead people, then it is an honorable thing, it is a fearful thing, and you should know that this is God's most precious possession of people, and he's entrusting you with people. So 70, God chose. 71, God promoted, or God gave a platform. But watch verse 72. So God chose 70, God promoted 71, but now watch. With upright heart, he, David, shepherded them and guided them. At some point we have to lead. God is not leading. God is calling and God is promoting, but we lead. And what you see in verse 72, it talks now what David did. And so if God has called you to a place of leadership and God has promoted you to a place of leadership, then now we see in verse 72 what you have to do. It's kind of a religious phrase where we say, no, it was all God. It's never all God. It's God does stuff and we respond. The grace is all God and the miracle is all God, but there's a response that we are supposed to have. And the gospel is about us responding to what God did. And so the response is this. David led with an upright heart and skillful hands. And so what we're going to see in every lesson today, there's a heart issue and a skill issue. David had an upright heart and he had skillful hands. And so what we want to do today is help us have better hearts as leaders and help identify some skills we must upgrade to be better leaders. So every time God wants to take us to a new level of leadership, there's a heart issue and a skill issue. If you learn the skills but don't get an upright heart, we've all seen skillful leaders who don't have good hearts. We've also seen leaders who have a great heart and they have outdated skills. They're still preaching in a way that our grandparents would have been moved by. They're still doing ministry in ways that was very relevant in 1991. But they haven't updated their skill set, but they have great hearts. Other people have updated skill sets, and their heart has long since grown hard and calloused and cynical, and the compassion has grown cold. So you follow me? We're after upright hearts and skill. So with every leadership topic we'll talk about today, and any leadership topic you encounter in the next year, always remember there's a heart issue and a skill issue. And if you only approach it with getting a new skill, you've missed half of what leadership's about. If you only approach it with getting your heart right, many times in leadership, it's an outdated skill or an outdated way of leading or an outdated way of communication. So we have to constantly upgrade both.
That's good, Steve.
All right. Heart and skill. Here's the question. And I want you to get in groups of three somehow. You can just sit where you are, grab three people. Here's what we're going to talk about right now. Describe the best leader you have ever worked with or 4. Wolfie and Allie don't count because everybody in the room is going to... We'll just assume they're the best leaders you've ever worked with. Right?
Yeah.
Christmas bonuses are coming up. That would have been a really good chance. So let's remove them since they're the leaders here that you all work with at some level. And let's go beyond that or to somewhere else just so we can have some variety. And so the best leader you've ever worked with or for, and what made him or her such a great leader? What was it? Okay, talk about that. If you get in a group of 3, we'll limit it to 3 minutes, 1 minute each. Go. Hey, is there any way to put a countdown clock on the screen? 3 minutes counting backwards? That would be wonderful. And also a mic for the audience would be nice. Can we get a handheld mic? And hey, you people online, this is a good time to talk to yourself, write it down, get a piece of paper, write down what we're talking about, okay? Okay, last 20 seconds. 20 seconds and we'll wrap up, and then Julian is going to put the microphone in your face. Just a moment. All right. Okay, Julian, I want you to pick us out 3 people to give a summary of what they just talked about, okay? Stand up where you are. 3 people. There's one right there to your right. Stand up. Quick summary of what you just talked about. Greatest leader and why.
Greatest leader for me is him, actually.
This is rigged, obviously.
Only because he's always done the trenches with us. He wakes up as early as we do. He sweats with us. He's very encouraging and still lets you grow as a leader, but still teaches you as well. So that's
Great. Okay. Okay. Find 2 more people who are going to talk about you, okay? Anybody else want to say something about Julian? Okay? Or about anyone? Okay. Right over here.
Hi, I'm just going to summarize what everybody in our group said, because I think there's a common theme of leaders who showed heart in the way they related to people, in the way they showed compassion. And as Steve said, one leader actually said, I never shut the door on anyone after someone had made a mistake. So we found that very encouraging, and also leaders who allowed you to shine and develop your talents. And that was our common theme.
Great. One more.
The summary from our group was that leaders who listen to you, whether it be personally or professionally, when having approachable leaders who listen and value you and show that value by remembering what you say, and also leaders who go about their ways with honesty and integrity.
Great. Okay. If you have your Bible open to, thank you all of you, open to Mark chapter 10. We live in a world today where leadership examples are often the exact opposite of the biblical teaching and the biblical pattern of leadership. Christians and non-Christians, though, would agree, usually, that Jesus was a great leader. Even though his idea of leadership in his day was the exact opposite of what leadership was sort of held up to be. What is biblical leadership? There's a lot of talk about leadership being everything from, you have the positional, you have the titles, you have the famous leadership guru John Maxwell, who says leadership is influence. That's an important thing. But if we look at this scripture, we simply have leadership as serving as a biblical definition of leadership. Mark chapter 10, verse 35. And I'm going to read this passage and then make a few comments. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to him and said to him, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. Now, they've got that a little bit backwards. Okay, Jesus, we want you to do whatever we say. But he humored them. Verse 36. He said to them, okay, what do you want me to do for you? Verse 37. They said to him, grant us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory. Jesus said to them, you do not know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized? Verse 41. And then the 10 heard it. That's the 12 disciples. 2 went and asked Jesus it. Now the other 10, they began to be indignant at James and John. And Jesus called them to him and said to them, you know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them, but it shall not be so among you. So here's what he said. The Gentiles are perceived to be the people who are far from God. Here's what he said. People who are far from God see leadership as an authority trip, as lording over. Leadership is a being over with authority. That's leadership to those far from God. And what does he say? Not so among you. That's not how to think about leadership, if you're following me. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant. Whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life ransom for many. Jesus uses 2 words to describe leadership that no one in his day ever aspired to. 2 positions in society he used to stamp leadership, to define leadership, to describe leadership, to say, this is what leadership is. And he picked 2 vocations, 2 places in culture that no one wanted. And he said, that's leadership. What were those? Servant and slave. They're very similar in what they actually did, but there were some slight differences And what it meant, we won't get into that, but the actual duty of a servant and slave was very similar. I don't know how it was where you grew up, but my parents used to motivate me, or they tried to motivate me like this, motivate me academically. They would say, if you don't study hard and do well in school, then you will grow up one day to be a ditch digger. That was the West Texas way of doing it. Anybody ever heard of a ditch digger? You know, you would go out and it was the lowest of manual labor jobs my parents could think of, and they would say, you don't want to be a ditch digger. If you don't study and get your degrees, you will be a ditch digger. The irony of it was, when I was 16 years old, my dad got me a summer job literally working as a ditch digger. 10 hours a day in the Mississippi summer heat with a pickaxe. My brother and I were literally digging ditches for AT&T to put in underground phone cables. That was in the 70s when the cables were going from on poles underground, and that was back-breaking hard work for $1.65 an hour.
Oh, wow.
I got what my dad had said all my life. I do not want to be a ditch digger more than this summer. What did your parents say? What was the phrase? If you don't study hard, you'll grow up to be a what? What did they say? Who's from South Africa? What did your parents say? A what? A maid. Philippines. Omi, what did your parents tell you? Homeless. Pastor. Anybody else? Locals? Anybody here? What do they say in the UK? What do they tell you? What do they threaten you with? If you don't, Daniel, what do they say? What do they say? Be a traveling musician? What was it?
Be nothing.
If you don't study, you'll be a what? An American? A what?
Work at McDonald's. Work at McDonald's.
McDonald's. Okay, there you go. Every culture has that. If you don't, and I can imagine going back 2,000 years, and probably the people listening to Jesus here, the disciples, their parents probably told them, if you don't work hard, if you don't study with your rabbi, if you don't, you're going to grow up to be a servant or a slave. That's what this was. And so Jesus takes the two lowliest. If he walked around here, he would have said, if you want to be great, cook fries at McDonald's. Be a maid. Be a ditch digger. Think like that. Our first session today is how to think like a leader. And Jesus is dealing with the way they think. And he uses these two phrases that no one wanted their kids to grow up to be a slave or a servant. No parent in that day ever thought, one day, if you work hard, study hard, you could be a servant. You could be a slave. You could be the one who washes people's feet when they come in from the dirty streets. You could be the one who does all the dirty work that no one else will do. You can do that. Jesus flips the script. Now, what is real leadership then? As we look at this text, they ask for position. Look at your right and your left. Look at your right. Look at your left. You know who's sitting there? Those seats, they really don't matter. They mean nothing. The person means something, but where they're sitting on your right, it really doesn't have any significance in our culture. In that culture it did. To sit on the right hand and the left hand of the leader was a big deal. And so when they asked, we want to sit on your right and your left, they were asking for position. But what Jesus is saying is this. Here's point number one. Leadership is influence, not position. It's not position. They ask for position, but that's not what leadership is. Let me explain what I mean by leadership is influence. A number of years ago, Kevin York and I were asked to help out with one of our Every Nation churches in the Nashville area. There were 4 congregations, 1 church in 4 locations around the Nashville area. And they were all growing, but one was not growing. It was actually shrinking a bit. And so Pastor Rice asked Kevin and I if when we're in town, would we help with this congregation? And good people there, really good people. And we were happy to help and serve however we could. Here's what happened. If you can imagine let's say that screen right there is the church property, and up in the top left-hand corner, that's where the church building was. And so the road was over here, so the rest of this is parking. And so I noticed this the first week we started helping there. At the worst parking place over here, where you had to walk the farthest, there was a black truck. It's Kevin York's. And so I wouldn't have done that, but since he was parked there, I parked next to him. Everybody else parked over here. And usually the pastor has a place really close to the door because, you know, pastors, it's really spiritually draining to walk. But Kevin started doing that. We never said a word. It was his black truck and my black Subaru. And within a few weeks, there was a silver Lexus parked next to us. And then after that, there was this orange Camaro. And then there was a Jeep. It took a while, but it was, you know what happened? It was obvious those cars were owned by people who were actually leaders in the church. None of them were staff. And Kevin and I, it was a contest to see who could get the worst parking place. But since I'm not really an early morning person, the only time I ever got it was when Kevin was out of the country. We never said a word. We never said leaders need to take the worst parking places and leave the better ones for others. We never said it. Kevin just started doing it, and I felt embarrassed that I wasn't, so I copied his example and took the 100-meter walk. I was exhausted when I got to church to preach and left the better spots for others. Kevin took the example of a servant and influenced by his actions, never said a word. And then people started fighting. It became a sort of thing of pride then, who could get the worst part. But it was that influence that Kevin had by just doing it. And it changed the leadership culture in that little congregation. Instead of battling for position. Secondly, leadership is service, not glory. Remember the question these guys said? They said, Jesus, let us have your right and your left hand in your glory. They didn't really want much right now because there wasn't a lot of glory. There was persecution. But they wanted this glorious thing. But here's the deal. Number 2, leadership is service, not glory. Leadership is influence, not position. Kevin influenced, not out of his position. He didn't stand up and say, hey, I'm the pastor here now. Here's how we're going to do things. He just started influencing by what he did, not by his position. Service, not glory. When I was in business school, a long, long time ago, the big rage of business schools in the late 70s, early 80s was this book and this teaching that was so revolutionary and so new. It was a former AT&T executive wrote a book with a radical idea. If you've been in business school, you may be familiar with Robert Greenleaf. He became a Harvard professor after being in a stint at AT&T. And we're talking now 70s, 80s, when I was in business school. And this radical idea they presented in business school. Greenleaf's concept was called servant leadership. Of course, he plagiarized it from Jesus in the Bible. But nobody in business school realized that, except a few of us. I think he borrowed it from Mark 10, what we're reading. But it was still true and applicable even in the corporate world. The world measures a person by how many servants he has. But God measures, the kingdom measures by how many people we serve. Most church plants, new churches, have a problem with volunteers. It's a never-ending problem, especially mobile churches where they have to set up each day and each week. This iPad's gone battery saver on me, so it's totally black. But anyway, that's my countdown clock. The apocalypse has happened. It's black. I don't know what to do now. Where was I? Somebody came to the end, I think. When I'm with church planters and you ask what's your biggest issue, biggest challenge, 9 out of 10 of them will say volunteers. Well, there's one church plant that I was just so impressed. They never had a problem with volunteers. They actually had more than they knew what to do with. And I witnessed it myself a number of years ago. It was our new church in Boston. Every Redefining Church in Boston. Adam Mabry, some of you know Adam. He spent years in Edinburgh helping start that church. And he moved to Boston, one of the least Christian, least church cities in all of America. Actually, there are cities and Muslim nations that have a larger percentage of Christianity than Boston does. Adam has no problem with volunteers. His problem is he doesn't know what to do with all of them. And I figured out why. A number of years ago, the morning I was preaching, 2 services in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. They meet in a YMCA, a 100-year-old YMCA, and they set up the equipment every single Sunday morning and break it down, and then go set it up Sunday night at a different place in the city and set it and break it down, set it, break it. So when I got there, he told me he was picking me up unusually early for the 2 services I was preaching that morning. And we got there, and then I realized Adam's the head of the setup crew. He was hooking wires, he was stacking chairs, and of course, since he did, again, this looks bad for me just standing around, I better do it too. And so I started stacking chairs, and I started plugging wires. He goes, get away from those wires. I obviously didn't know what I was doing. And so every Sunday morning now, as church started, the senior pastor would go and stack chairs and set up the drum kit and plug wires. And then he would go change clothes and come back and open the service and sometimes lead worship and take the offering and preach and pray for people at the altar. And then when the last person was prayed for, would lead the crew, breaking it all down, putting it in boxes and taking it away, and do it again that night in a different location. Now, the church is quite large today. Hundreds of people, and he still does it. I called him a number of months ago. I said, Adam, remember when I was there years ago? You were the head of the setup crew. Are you still doing that? And he goes, absolutely. He goes, I am. That is one of my main jobs. I am the main preacher and the head of the setup crew. And guess what? He still has no problem with volunteers in that church. They have more volunteers than they know what to do with. In fact, some of them just stood around and prayed. They were in the way. I wanted to go pray with them, but I just thought, man, I probably need to act like a servant here, since Adam has set the bar so high. Thirdly, leadership is guidance, not authority. Remember, this passage we read, Jesus said, hey, wait a minute. Gentiles see leadership as authority that's over people, that's lording over. Not so with you. Leadership, biblical leadership, is guidance, not authority. In other words, do you push or do you lead? Gentiles lord it over. Jesus said, we are going to provide guidance, not this authority thing. Example of that, I remember the first time, actually the only time I've been to the Tower of London. And what are those, the guys, the guards that take you around, those suits there with those red things they're wearing?
Beef eater.
Beef eater, that's a strange name. Beef eater. No vegans allowed. Yes, my kind of people. All right, let's not get into that. Beef eaters. And it's sort of, when you're in the square, if you've done the Tower of London tour, I don't know how many, like maybe it's 10 or 12 of us in each group, and you just randomly got in a group, and then you're in the square, and so our guy is telling us stuff, and it's really boring, honestly, really boring. But that group over there, there's one there, there's one there, there's one there, then you go upstairs, and then the same thing happens, and you're in this group, and then your group goes, and then you go to these different stations, they explain things. Ours was painfully boring, and that one, they're laughing and clapping. I thought, I can't wait till we get there, because that's cool. And we go over there, and guess what? Ours is boring, and that one is amazing. After the third one, here's what Deborah and I did. We saw that, we just went to that other group. We blended in, and we laughed, and we clapped, and it was the same stuff, but that guy was so life-giving. I think the other one was a vegan. That was a real vegan. Okay, edit that. Never mind, I'm sorry. When we lead with life, people will follow. But that guy, anyway, it's guidance, not authority. Okay, last one, relationship, not rules. Let's wrap this up, and then I'm going to let you talk about that last question. Relationships, not rules. Because we lead primarily people, not just meetings. Not just ministries, not just organizations, not just departments. I've never offended a department, but I've offended people before. Programs don't get their feelings hurt. People do. Leading an organization is easy. Leading a ministry is easy. Leading a department is easy. Leading a seminar is easy. Leading people is difficult because people actually have feelings. So leadership is relationship, not just rules to follow. I'll never forget, this is probably 3 years ago, I had been trying to empower younger leaders in the Philippines, maybe it was 4 years ago, and this was one of our first large campus conferences where I had no role whatsoever. I was not getting on stage one time, I was not touching a microphone, I was not saying a prayer, I was a participant. And so if you can imagine a basketball arena in the Philippines, there are almost 10,000 students there, and I actually bring my airline's earplugs every time I go to an Every Nation campus conference. I do. I got them, and I'm really enjoying it because of that. Sitting right over here. This middle section, you're in this basketball arena, thousands of people. And Freddie Kabiling is about to preach. I'm sitting over here, and when he's introduced by the video, he walks up to that stage and got a one-person standing ovation. Most of the 10,000 people were a polite, like a golf clap. You know, a golf tournament. But there's one person right here that was on this corner is screaming and pumping her fist and yelling, and then she punches the person next to her, and then she stands up. So that was two of them. These were University of the Philippines students. And the girl, the first to stand up, was our president of our student club there. She's now a full-time campus missionary at the University of the Philippines. And she was also Pastor Ferdy's daughter. That's leadership. It's relationship, not rules. It was interesting that the closest person to Ferdy in that whole room was giving him the most honor. The person who knew him the most. The person who knew whether or not what he preached was lived at home. The person who's known him good, bad, and ugly. Because of that relationship, she jumped to her feet, pumped her fist, yelled, and made her buddy stand up too. I thought, that's leadership. I want to close with this thought. 1 Corinthians 4, 16 through 17. Paul said this, I urge you, be imitators of me. That's a scary thing for a leader to say. That is why I sent you Timothy. Now watch this. That's why I sent you Timothy, my beloved and faithful child in the Lord, to remind you of my ways in Christ as I teach them everywhere. In 1 Thessalonians, Paul referred to himself as a brother, a father, even a mother. A little weird, but he did that. These are all relational words. Leadership is relationship. It's a relationship. It's not just keeping the rules. Paul constantly appealed to relational terms, not authoritative terms. When he really wanted a church to do something, he didn't say, hey, wait, remember, I'm the apostle. I'm the top of the pyramid here. I have authority. No, he'd go, remember when I was with you, I acted like a brother. Remember, I acted like, the way I treated you was like a mother with a nursing child. I was gracious, I was kind, I served you. Remember that relationship. And then he would give his strong appeals. We're out of time according to that black clock in front of me. So what we want to do is this. I want you to talk about in your groups, and then we're going to wrap the session up. We've said that leadership is relationship, not rules. It's guidance, not authority. It's service, not glory. It's influence, not position. But let me say one thing about authority. It's not authority over people, but there is authority in leadership. And let me give an example. When we started our new building in Manila, some of you have been there. This was probably 16 years ago when we opened our brand new auditorium in Fort Bonifacio. We had a rule in there that no food or drink. It wasn't a spiritual thing. It was a carpet. We didn't want it getting dirty and having to clean it. And so between services, my habit, so this was, the building was brand new, it was newly opened, but between services, my habit was always to take one of the younger men that I mentor, one of our younger pastors or campus missionaries, and between services, hop in my car, drive right down the street 2 blocks to Starbucks, get a coffee, and come back. And all the while, what I do is ask that young leader, what can I do to upgrade that sermon in the next service? And it does 2 things. It helps me communicate with a younger generation, but it also helps me see whether these young leaders are thinking right, and if they even listened to the sermon the first time. And it's a preaching lesson. So I don't remember who I had with me, but I get in the car, we drive down, and coming back, but I miscalculated the time, and coming back in, I don't really like to do late at church as a leader. And our pastors are trained that no matter how many services you do, you are right there engaged in the music part of worship.
That's right.
Even if it's your 3rd service, you are there and you're fully engaged. You don't wander in time to preach. So that's the anathema in our world. So I don't want to be late, and so I'm rushing through, and I come right through the doorway with my coffee, running up to the front before the first song starts, and right as I pass through this lady, this usher, I knew she had a tag that said usher. She goes, "Sir, you're not allowed to bring the coffee in here." Now, I don't know if she knew who I was or not. I'm the only white guy there. I wasn't really blending in. I'm thinking, did she not know me? Here's what I didn't do. You know who I am? Steve Murrell. Google it. I'm the big boss here. I've got the authority, okay? You know what I did? I went, "Oh, you're right. Sorry." I stepped out off of the carpet onto the foyer floor, and I made a big mistake. I needed that caffeine, and so I just chugged that whole. You talk about tongues of fire. I handed her the empty cup, and I ran in. I was under her authority. Leaders are not above the rules they set. It's that whole, I don't know if the whole Lex, Rex, Rex, Lex thing. Anybody remember that from history? No? Look it up. Is the king above the law, or is the law above the king? Rex, Lex, or Lex, Rex? Not suggesting pet names here. So there's authority, but it's not authority over people, and it's rules that are set. So anyway, I just wanted to clarify that it's not like it's anything goes. All right, let's talk about this question. Turn around to 3 people. Here's the question. What should you do when you work with a leader who does not display an attitude of a servant? Think about David, Joseph, Daniel. They were forced to serve in an unhealthy leadership environment. What did they do? How did David handle working? The leader was Saul. He was less than healthy. Joseph, multiple times, worked with leaders who were not really very godly. Daniel worked with leaders who were not very godly. What did they do? What should you do if you're in a situation where it's not a healthy leadership? It's not what we're talking here. It's not the ideal godly leadership environment. How should you handle that? No names, please. Talk about that in your group, okay? Talk about that for the next 3 minutes. Okay, here's what we're going to do. It looks like we have a 10-minute stretch break. Is that correct? Yes. All right. I think that also might mean coffee or tea. Yeah. All right. 10-minute break. I think when you hear the music, come back. How about that? All right. There we go.
actually kind of hit like all the work in.
When my request, I said, can we have lunch with no bread? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, those things got the lunch. Yeah, it was fresh my first year.
This broadcast is presented in stereo on Sunday.
Izzy, can you do me a favour? And stand right there and try and focus it as in front of the camera. Just trying to refocus it just now. I'm going to use my youth here. It's going to take a second to come up, okay? So it's in focus from this. Otherwise, it would be an easy fix. It does have.
Okay, folks, are we ready? Yeah. 29 seconds. Come on, grab your seats. Come on in from outside if you're still out there. Starting in 10 seconds. starting our second session. Did you enjoy that first session? Yeah. Thinking like a leader? Yes. Challenging stuff, right? Yeah. Andrew and I were just talking in the bathroom. I won't say too much about that. We're challenged in how we do our authority now. We have to change the way that we do things. We can't just tell people, we've got to guide them. But these are real awesome biblical truths. Obviously, so much of it is simple. So much of the Bible, so much of Jesus' leadership principles, simple, but really so challenging to put into practice. So powerful when we do put them into practice. So are you ready for session 2?
Yes.
How to act like a leader?
Yes.
Pastor Steve, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I hope you have plenty of caffeine in your system now. I just got some little caffeine boost, and I drank it slowly, so it didn't go down. I had an interesting brief conversation in the lobby with Alex about business and some of the application of biblical leadership principles beyond church application, but in the different types of business world. And a couple of thoughts on that. I told him that my sons, I have 3 sons. They are 31, 29, and 27 years old. They were all born and raised in the Philippines. And one by one, when they finished high school in the Philippines, they went to university in America. One of my sons did a exchange at Oxford, and then once he graduated, he ended up coming back and doing a master's there. So he's given me his favorite. We ran into his favorite cookie shop. The other day, I took a video and tormented him and sent it to him. It's a cookie shop that he loved there. We found one in London. So then he's been texting me back, going, all the cookies he wants me to bring me from Ben's Cookies. So anyway, he's in academia. My oldest son is finishing his PhD in a few months, a PhD in Islamic history. He lectures at Vanderbilt University on Islamic history and basically the history of religion as well, and everything related to that. My other 2 sons are entrepreneurs. They are serial entrepreneurs. And I was talking about how, with Alex, how their business has grown in the last number of years to hundreds of employees in 9 different cities across America. They're, in the next few years, will expand to, they're trying to add 20 more stores in the next few years. And the time it took them to go from 0 to 9, they're trying to take that same 3 years and go from 9 to 30. And one of the things they did as the owners of the business is my 2 sons and their partner, they have just hired a CEO who is actually their boss now. And I've had some interesting talks with my sons because they'll ask me questions about that. And one of my sons is cool with it. He's no problem. One of my other sons is really struggling with some of I'm the owner and I can fire him, but when I get to work, he's my boss. It makes for a complicated situation. And so we've talked through that, and I said, it's exactly how I am, okay? When I go back to Manila, Ferdy is the senior pastor of Victory Manila. Victory Manila meets in now 37 locations in the metro area, 153 weekend worship services, and Ferdy Kabili is the boss. And so I'm in his world, I'm not the boss. When I'm there, when I'm here, Wolfie is the senior pastor here. He is our European Regional Director. I'm here to serve him. I'm here to do what he says. And I think when you're leading, you have to know who is actually leading and what is my role. And I'm walking through some of that with my sons of I said, when you have your quarterly board meeting, you guys are the board, the owners. You're his boss. But once that board meeting's over, now you are the creative director, and you are the, whatever their titles are, but he's the CEO. And it's, leadership becomes interesting when you're expanding. And when you acknowledge that you don't know everything. And if you're the senior leader, here's what I have to remind myself often, it's healthy. I'm not the leader. I wasn't the leader in Victory Manila for all those years. My wife and I went to Manila in 1984 on a 1-month summer mission trip. And we ended up living there for, I don't know if that's actually moving. Oh, it is, okay. We ended up living there for 24 years. Now we split time back and forth. But I like to remind myself and the other leaders, I wasn't the leader because I was the smartest. It wasn't because I was the most anointed. Anybody who listens to podcasts knows it's not because I'm the best preacher, because I'm not. Same with Every Nation. I'm not the leader of Every Nation because I'm of Every Nation churches and ministries, because I'm the smartest, most spiritual, wisest, most mature, best speaker, best leader, best orator. None of that. None of that's true. I'm the leader of Victory simply because I was first. I was the only one dumb enough to try it. That's why you're the leader, Wolfie. You just got here first and didn't quit. And you know, it's actually a good thing because it relieves me the pressure of having to always act like I'm the smartest. I'm not. And if you're leading something, it's probably because you got there first, if you're the pioneer. But it doesn't mean you're the... And I was proud of my sons because they started the business. And it's going great. But they realize there are things we don't know how to do at this level. And we need to bring someone in and follow that person. And it takes wisdom and humility to realize just because I'm the leader doesn't mean I'm the smartest one in the room. I am rarely the smartest one in the room unless I'm with my grandchildren. And then I wonder sometimes. But as a leader, you don't have to pretend. Okay? All right, here's the question. Here's the question. I'm going to answer it first to give you an example of what we're looking for. Describe the best team you've ever been a part of, and what made that a great team. Describe the best team you've ever been a part of, and what made it a great team. When I first encountered that question, my mind jumped back immediately to, let me see, 1998, Singapore. It was the Southeast Asia Little League baseball regional finals, trying to get to the Little League World Series, okay? My son was playing on that team. They're all Filipinos, and my son, and that team was amazing. My part of the team was one of the coaches. And Coach Randy, best Filipino baseball coach ever. This guy's amazing. He's the cheerleader. He's the baseball genius. Energy. He was a leader. And then we had a guy from Honduras who had played, almost made it to the Major League Baseball. He made the next league under. And he was coaching, and I was coaching. And boy, that team was just fantastic until we played the Japanese. We weren't as good as we thought we were. But that team was amazing. I thought about another team I was on in 1984. And I think that baseball team was great because everybody knew their roles. All the coaches knew their roles. All the players knew their roles. And nobody was great at everything, but everybody was great at something. And everybody got to do what they were great at. It was a fun time. The other team that was like that for me was when we first went to the Philippines in 1984. I was 24 years old. Rice Brooks was leading the team. And it was me, Rice, a guy named Bob, who was the only person that I've ever seen Rice correct for praying too much. How many of you have a problem with praying too much? At one point, Rice said to me, I said, Bob, prayer's great, but at some point you have to go minister to people. You can't just pray 8 hours a day. Dial it back to 6. He rebelled and didn't do it, but Bob was leading the prayer. I was in charge of follow-up. Rice was preaching every night. We had a guy named Al who was opening the doors for us, opening all the campuses, and that team was amazing. It worked well together. It flowed. It was just a great 1 month summer mission trip. And then we had like 60 college students. About 1/3 were tourists, 1/3 were missionaries, 1/3, I don't even know what they were, why they were there, but we had 60 on the team. Really about 20 who actually did anything, but that team was great. It really worked well. So, all right, with those thoughts, get in groups, talk about what's the best team, describe the best team you've ever been a part of, and what made it a great team. Why did it work?
There you go. Put that hands down.
Okay, in just a moment, we're going to have everybody who's been on Julian's team to line up and tell us how great it's been. All right, keep talking. Find us 3 volunteers. If they don't volunteer, you volunteer them. Best team you've ever been a part of, and why was it a great team? Over here. Mike?
We went on a mission trip many years ago, and we had about 14 people with us, and it was just, everyone was there for their own reason, but and they each wanted to achieve their own thing during that trip, but there was a big principle that everyone knew was happening. So everyone worked together towards one goal, which was great.
Great. Everyone worked together toward one goal. Excellent.
Mine's not nearly as spiritual. It was an intramural soccer team.
Yeah.
And so it was 4 girls, 2 guys, 6 aside. And I think the reason why it worked well is because everyone looked out for each other. So we knew when someone got tired and subbed them out. But the person who was being subbed out, even if they weren't tired, if they were called to sub out, they just said okay and they went. So that worked really well. But also we won, so.
One last.
A team where there's fun and laughter.
Okay, good. All right. Excellent. Remember, what we're about to talk about, like everything else today, is going to come down to heart issues and skill issues. What does God want to deal with my heart about? And what skill do I need to upgrade? If we upgrade our skills, but we don't allow God to go deep in our heart and change things and correct things and adjust things, then we're not going to be the leader He's called us to be. If we only do the hard stuff, but not the disciplined upgrading of leadership skills. And so as we go through this lesson, I want you to think about, how does this apply to my heart? What is God trying to do internally in me as a leader? And what can I do? God doesn't upgrade your skills. You're responsible to upgrade those. But God does change hearts. And God does convict our hearts. And God does give us a heart of flesh for a heart of stone. And those two work together constantly in this whole leadership development process. And so as you're working with leaders, and things aren't going as they should with a leader of a department, of a site, of a ministry, of a small group, or wherever the leadership is being played out, as the one responsible to lead leaders and the one responsible to develop leaders, we have to always look at, is there a heart issue and is there a skill issue? What is the heart issue? What is the skill issue? And help move those on. And, you know, honestly, in my life, it's usually almost always both. There's almost always a heart issue with me, and there's almost always a skill that needs to be upgraded, that I need to get better at. I just need to be better. I just need to learn more and do the hard work of getting better at certain things as a leader. So that's back to Psalm 78, verse 72. David led with an upright heart and with skillful hands. And that's our goal today, that we will have better hearts when this is over, and we'll have upgraded skills, or at least we'll know what skills we need to work on when we leave here. Now, as we've said over and over, Jesus was the greatest leader who ever lived. He took 12 very provincial, less than impressive teenagers, spent 3 years with them, and changed the world through them. He didn't pick ready-made leaders. He didn't pick people who really had any kind of leadership whatsoever, but yet he turned normal, average, actually less than average people into great leaders. And how do you do it? So the first session, we talked about how to think like a leader. That means to think like a servant, think like a slave. Secondly, to this session, we're going to talk about how to act like a leader. What do leaders actually do? Is the leader the one who just sits around and tells everybody what to do? What does a leader do? And I've identified 3 things that a leader does. And I will just give them to you right up front. Build a team, lead a team, and trust the team. Build, lead, and trust. There was a story took place a little over 80 years ago in China. And it was a group of actually British missionaries who were there. And some of them were part of the Cambridge 7, if you've ever heard of that in mission history. And they were feeling like it was time to move on and turn the leadership over to the Chinese church. That's a great idea that too often mission doesn't do. And they were turning the leadership over. And so they had this veteran missionary who was one of the original Cambridge 7, D.E. Host, and he was the guy who actually took Hudson Taylor's place as the leader of the China Inland Mission. And they're now in this big, empowering moment to turn over churches all across China to Chinese leadership. And they couldn't figure out who the leaders should be. And here's what this veteran, he was in his 80s, this old missionary said, quote, "It occurs to me that perhaps the best test of whether one is qualified to lead is to find out whether anyone is following." That seemed pretty simple. Yeah. They're having all these debates about this Chinese leader and that Chinese leader and all this, and he just simply said, well, is anybody following those guys? And that is a good measure of leadership. It's not a good measure of heart or character, but of just basic leadership. To lead, if we think about it that way, if we look around and say, is anyone following, then what we find is that leading does not require a position or a title. In order to lead, you do not need a position or a title. Many examples in our generation, in our lifetime in history, from Nelson Mandela, who led with no title, no position. He was 27 years in prison. It didn't stop him from leading. For the Filipinos, you'll remember Ninoy Aquino. He was a political prisoner, solitary confinement for 7 years, then exiled, became a Harvard professor. And yet, with no title and no position and no staff, he led, similar to Nelson Mandela, and changed a nation and took down a dictatorship with no position, no title. In my country, some of you might be old enough to remember President Jimmy Carter. President Carter, by everybody's estimate, was a failed presidency. He did something that is very difficult in American politics, but it might happen this round as well. It's very rare that a sitting president doesn't get reelected. It's actually hard to do, to not get reelected, and Carter didn't get reelected. The economy was in shambles. The U.S. Embassy in Iran had been taken over by terrorists, and Carter was not reelected. It was one of the worst landslide losses in the history of American politics. Ronald Reagan beat him, and Carter only won 2 states. He left humiliated. He disappeared from the public eye. And a few years later, Jimmy Carter reemerged. It wasn't a PR campaign. The media found him. This was a former president who was a Christian man, Sunday school teacher to this day. And he had a carpenter's apron and a hammer. And he was working for, at that time, a little-known organization called Habitat for Humanity that built houses for homeless people. And that's what Carter had been doing for several years when he left the presidency. And nobody had ever heard of Habitat for Humanity. Now it's a global thing. We partner with them in the Philippines quite often with rebuilding after floods and typhoons. And former President Carter continued to serve out of the limelight. And then the next several presidents secretly got him involved in global negotiations. One had to do with Libya, one had to do with North Korea, and it was outside of the media, and his influence started growing and growing and growing, and he had no position and no title except for volunteer house builder at Habitat for Humanity. He served his way back to a place of great prominence that still didn't have a title or position, and some people think that he actually accomplished for world peace and other things more when he didn't have the title of president than when he did. Mandela had no title, no position. Aquino had no title, no position. Carter had no title, no position. Gandhi, I hate to say, but changed the whole British Empire with no title, no position. The list goes on and on and on. So if we're waiting for a title or a position and staff and a salary and a budget and a website and an office and office machinery before we do anything, we're probably never going to do anything. Real leaders lead without a title, without a position, without a budget, without a facility, without staff, without a PA, without anything. They just lead. But those who are waiting for all of the stuff before they lead are not leaders. So don't make an excuse that, boy, if I only had budget, I could really get something done. If I only had staff, if I had an office, that's the key right there. Just lead. What do we mean by lead? Serve. What did President Carter do? He served his way back into changing the world. But I don't think he did it so that that would happen. It was odd that it happened. He just served. All right, here's what leaders do. What does a leader do? How to act like a leader. If you're a leader, then number one, you build your team. Great leaders never lead alone. There are some activities that are simply too dangerous to attempt to do alone. Law enforcement is one. You know, if you watch the police or law enforcement movies or TV shows, there's always backup. There's always a partner. There's always that, right? I mean, superheroes do it alone, but law enforcement people, because it's too dangerous, you have to have someone else with you. Scuba diving. Anybody scuba dive here? Okay, I've lived most of my life in the most beautiful underwater world in the world. In Anilau, 2 hours south of Manila. Wow, people come from all over the world just to do life under the sea right there. And my youngest son and I scuba dive together. You never scuba dive alone. One of the first things they teach you when you are learning to scuba dive is you always have a partner. You're within arm's length. You never lose eyesight. Your partner is always there. Why? Because it's too dangerous to do it alone. So, it's too dangerous to do it alone. Law enforcement, scuba diving, third one, ministry. Don't attempt to do it alone. It's too dangerous. No matter what you're leading, don't lead alone. If you're in business, don't lead alone. Build a team. Jesus, who was the greatest leader who ever lived, I mean, he was God, of course. He could do anything he wanted to, but he built a team. First thing he did, he started building a team of 12 people. Within that team, he had an executive committee of 3, Peter, James, and John. And as you follow what Jesus did, he often met with his executive team. He didn't call it that, but he had an executive team. He often met with them, and then he would have the larger team of 12. Then there, outside of that, there was another team of 70. Jesus built a team. Most great leaders in the Bible were actually leadership teams. And if you read closely, you'll see these great leaders, and you'll realize what they did is they built a team. They did not lead alone. Paul never ministered or traveled alone. He always had Luke with him or Timothy with him. As you read the book of Acts, you know, Luke wrote the book of Acts, and parts of it will say we, and then it'll say Paul departed, and he'll list the people with him. That means Luke stayed behind. And then eventually Luke would catch up, and then it'll go back to we. And you'll see that team. And their parts of the team were left to do certain tasks, and then they would meet in another city, and the we, and Paul, and we. But even when Paul was separated from Luke, there was a group with Paul and a group with Luke. It was always a team. It was never just Paul. Moses, who's heralded as the greatest leader in the Old Testament. It wasn't just Moses, though. It was Moses, Aaron, Joshua. He had a team. It was a multi-generational team, but it was a team. Daniel, who stood up and everybody else bowed down and he stood and all of that stuff. But the fact is, Daniel got there as a young man, realized, I can't do this alone. And you read chapter 1 of Daniel, it's fascinating to read chapter 1 and notice the plural versus singular pronouns used. Read Daniel 1 and notice every time it's a plural pronoun. It'll give you a whole different picture of Daniel as a leader. Daniel rarely said, I am doing this. It was always we. Test your servants. See if we. Wait a minute, who's we, Daniel? It's just you. You know what he did? He went and grabbed his buddies, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and dragged them into his convictions. Daniel created a team out of nothing. I get the picture when I read Daniel 1 that he is dragging Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, kicking and screaming, into his team. How many of you are thankful for people who do that to you? Rice Brooks dragged me to the Philippines and left me there. I am thankful for people who drag me, push me, and pull me deeper and deeper into the purpose of God. Amen. Because left to myself, I will always choose the path of least resistance. Always. That's me. But I'm thankful for the teams that God puts me around who press me to be a better version of me than I would be left to myself. David, great leader, but David had his 30 mighty men, and again, he had an executive team within that of those 3 mighty men. It goes on and on, okay? Leaders, great leaders build teams. Not so great leaders lead alone. But where do you get the leaders? I had a friend of mine, he pastors one of the largest churches in Manila, 25,000 or so, huge church, great church. And this guy came one time. I was a guest speaker at something he did, and I brought a bunch of our leaders with us. And as he got to know them, he turned to me and he said, "Steve, where did you get all these leaders?" He was so impressed. And he, like many growing churches and many non-growing churches, had a leadership shortage. He simply did not have enough leaders to get the job done. This was a huge church, but he didn't have enough leaders. He said, "Steve, where did you get all these leaders? These leaders are amazing." Eventually he asked if he could hire some. He said, "You have so many, you mind if I offer jobs?" Go for it. I've had 3 different mega churches try to hire our leaders. And every time I've told them, it won't bother me at all. Go ahead. Thank you for asking, but go ahead. Offer them jobs. If they will go because you offer them more money, we will be better off without them. None of them left. One of them came back and asked for a raise. We didn't lose any because, you can't buy sons. You have to birth them. He said, "Where'd you get these leaders?" And here's what I told him. I told my buddy, I said, "You don't really want to know." He said, "No, I do. Where did you get these leaders? You've got so many leaders. Where did you get them?" "You really don't want to know." "Yes, I do." "Where did you go?" So, well, first of all, you have to understand, they didn't look like this when I got them. What you're seeing is the end of a 15-year process, or process. You wouldn't have recognized them as leaders when I started. I found them in the U-Belt on Recto Avenue. A few of you know where that is. One of the most crime-ridden, poverty-stricken parts of Metro Manila. That's where I got them. And there was very little visible leadership potential on any of them. And it took a lot of work to get what you're calling a leader. That's when he said, "Well, you have so many, could I hire some?" He didn't want to go down where I got him and take 15 years to get something that resembled a leader. 1 Corinthians 1:26 is a great passage to think about when you're trying to develop leaders. "For consider your calling. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low," that means short people, "to despise, and low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human might boast in the presence of God." You can never be too small to be used by God, but you can be too big. You can never be too uneducated, but you can be too educated. God takes what's not and makes it something. When we're looking for potential leaders, we have never been a ministry that's looking for leaders. We've been a ministry that's about potential leaders. That's why we go to the campus. They're potential leaders. They're future leaders. But we've always tried to build a ministry that would reach future leaders and potential leaders. Not leaders, but potential. People say, "Well, what are you looking for?" We used to say we were looking for fat people, but that bothered some people. We said faithful, available, trainable. But we thought, okay, that's a little... So now we're looking for faith. Here's what I'm looking for. And potentially faith. Faithful. You do what you say you'll do. It's as simple as that. Faithful. Available. There's some people who are faithful, but they work 12 hours a day and they live 2 hours away. They're never available. I can't work with that at a leadership level. Faithful, available, what's the next word? Faith. I. Involved. If I need a new kids ministry leader, I'm looking for someone already involved in kids ministry. I'm not trying to hire someone from the outside. If I'm looking for a new person to lead in any aspect of anything, I'm looking for someone already involved in that. Therefore, I'm never looking outside. I believe all the potential leaders are already right here. The silver bullet from the outside is rarely the best answer when we're talking about leadership development. Homegrown versus hired. Faithful, available, involved, teachable. People who already know it all, I can't help them. I can't work with them. When I find know-it-alls, I tell them, you obviously know more than everyone on our team. You probably need to go start your own church, or at least your own cult, because I don't know what to do with you. Teachable. And then finally, the last one, faith. Hungry. Hungry for more. Not content. So that's what I'm looking for. If somebody is faithful, available, already involved, teachable, and hungry for more, there is a potential leader right there. That's all I need to work with. They may not know much. They may not have been around very long. They may not be very educated. They may not have good theology yet. But I can work with that. I cannot work with someone who's not faithful, not available, not involved, not teachable, and not hungry. I don't care how long they've been a church member or what kind of degrees they have or how much money they have. None of that matters. All right, 5 top team builders. How do you build a team? We're going to get to the rest of it in a moment, but 5 top team builders. How do you build a team? And I'm confused about this clock. It has 45 and 23. Is the 23 is that counting backwards? This is the most confusing clock ever now. I've got 3 numbers up there, 45, 23, and 21. I don't know what's what.
You've got about 10.
Okay. That is, maybe it's upside down. It's like in another language, but it's numbers. Explain it to me in the lunch break. How do you build a team? So what do leaders do? If we're going to act like a leader, the first thing we're going to do is build a team, right? How do you build a team? Here are my team builders. Number 1, pray together. We always start with prayer. Number 2, sacrifice together. I have some leaders I work with, and when we're together, we'll start remembering that, I better not say the places, but there are horrible sleeping accommodations in underground church situations that some of us have been in together. And they're funny now, and they're great stories. At the time, they were great sacrifice. I remember my first and only time to St. Petersburg, Russia, when Murrell was there. I was terrified the whole time. I was living in some gang-infested, that was his neighborhood, but it was a scary place. They're great memories. You sacrifice together. Pray together, sacrifice together, prosper together. When things grow, and there's plenty now, you let the whole team share in that. Dream together and laugh together. That's how you build a team. Now, all right, what did I say? How to act like a leader? Number 1, you build a team. Number 2, you lead your team. Just because it's a team does not mean it's a team of equals. We're all equal at the foot of the cross. We're all equal in terms of Jesus paid the same price for all of us. But we are not all equal in wisdom. We are not all equal in maturity. We're not all equal in knowledge. We're not all equal in our understanding of biblical truth and theology. We're not all equal in our grasp of the strategic approach to what God has called us to do. We're not all equal in that. Does everybody get it? In some ways, yes, it's a team of equals in terms of Jesus paid the same price for everyone, but all other things are not equal. And so just because you're a part of a team does not mean you have an equal voice. team, I work with many teams. I was just talking with, I think, Wolfie yesterday about our Every Nation Campus ministry and the role on our apostolic teams. And there are certain times when our Every Nation Campus ministry director in the Philippines, Joseph Bonifacio, when we have a team, he's the youngest on the team, but there are certain topics when he is the final authority. Because he knows what he's talking about more than the rest of us do. And we would be foolish not to listen to him. But there are about a dozen other topics and he is not the authority, and his opinion weighs the least of that team. So it depends on what you're talking about as to which voice has the greatest weight. So it is not a team of equals, it is a team that needs to be led. So even though there will be people on the team who are smarter than you, more spiritual than you, I was talking about my son's business, where my sons and their partner are the owners, but they've hired experts in areas because those people know a lot more than they do about certain parts of the business. And when we have people like that, we would be foolish not to listen, but we still can't abdicate the leadership of that. And if you are the team leader, then you lead. It doesn't mean you're always right, the smartest, or have the best ideas, but it still has to be led. You lead the team. How do you lead a team? 3 thoughts real quickly on leading a team. You lead a team by bringing energy to the team. Energy can be quiet, energy can be loud. Energy can be frenetic, where you're super caffeinated, or chilled, but you bring energy by being fully engaged. Multitasking is a myth. Let me tell you what we do with our teams. I learned this from our Singaporean consultant, Rachel Ong. She explained to me in her meetings, when they walk into one of her meetings, there's a basket, and everyone deposits their phones and their iPads in the basket, and there are pencils and paper. And when the meeting is over, they can get their phones and their iPads and go check Facebook. So I started doing that in some of our meetings. I had 2 baskets. I had a basket for iPhones, and I had a trash can up there. I'd actually do this. I was just messing with them because we were apostolic. But I started confiscating. We went back to pencil and paper to bring energy and engagement and focus to what we're doing. My boardroom table now is a stand-up table. People hate coming to my meetings. I love them because they're short. We have a table. There are no chairs. It's this high. That's our boardroom. My office in Manila. It's a table this high, and everybody stands. Nobody gets too long. All of my meetings are standing meetings. My desk is a standing desk too. I wrote this book standing up the whole time. Actually, my last 3 books have been written on a standing desk, this high, standing, and I can walk around, I can pace, and stand. Anyway, all right. Bring your energy. Number 2, leaders bring energy. Number 2, leaders bring clarity. And that's one of the biggest jobs of a leader, is constantly clarifying vision, values, lanes, priorities. And I'm no longer the executive, feet on the ground all the time in Manila. You know what I am, basically? I'm a traffic cop. I keep people in their lanes. Here's what I do as a leader most of the times. I sit down with leaders and go, okay, wait a minute, whoa. That's not your lane. That's his lane. You get back over there and let this person do what they're best at. You're no good at that. Stay over here. You're great here, you're terrible here. That's pretty much what I do most of my life, is pushing people into their lanes. So as a leader, you bring energy, you bring clarity, and finally you bring unity. How many of you are parents of more than one child? I think when parents leave the hospital when their second child is born, I think they should be issued a referee uniform with a whistle. Because for the next 20 years, pretty much what you're going to do as a parent is referee. No, give that toy back. No, that's his food. No, don't talk to your sister that way. Don't bite your brother. I mean, that's what you do as a parent. I don't know, at least me. Does anybody else do that pretty much? And as a pastor, that's pretty much a full-time job. bringing unity among siblings who actually love each other, but they pretend like they don't. They hide it well. And so as a leader on your team, one of your big jobs, you bring energy, you bring clarity, and you bring unity. Leaders create unity. And listen, if people come and drop things that start dividing and you run with one side or the other, you're not a leader. Leaders fix disunity. They don't throw gasoline on the fire. Leaders diffuse it. Leaders are peacemakers. I'm looking for that in leaders. Can you fix a problem that's a unity issue? Or when it gets involved with you, does it get worse? And does the divide get larger? Yeah, you're a skilled leader. Yes, you're a skilled communicator. Yes, you've got a lot of skills. But every time an issue comes, the division gets bigger when it gets around you. I don't care if you know more Bible than the other guy. You're not leading in my world. If you can't bring unity as a leader, you have no place on my leadership team. So I actually have some very unskilled, immature leaders because they know how to bring unity. And I have some people on the sidelines who don't ever bring unity, but they're really smart. But I can't use them. You've got to be able to bring unity. That's what leaders do. If you're going to act like a leader, you build bridges, not walls. You don't divide, you bring unity. Finally, trust your team. All right, I think I've got like 1 minute left on that clock. What do leaders do? If we're going to think like a leader, think like a servant. Now we're going to act like a leader. What does a leader do? Builds a team, leads the team. Once you have a team, it's not just all equals, and it's not a democracy, and it's not this big blob. That team has to be led. Build a team, lead a team, and then finally, this is the balance of leading the team. Trust your team. And this is about empowering versus micromanaging. I'll never forget this moment. It was a surprise birthday party for my 40th birthday last year. Why is that funny? Let me live in delusional and delusional. It was 18 years ago, my 40th birthday. It was the first time they actually pulled off a surprise. I was actually surprised because it was like a week before my birthday. Well, you may have been there. It was at the PICC. We had a conference. And then we moved over to the hotel, and it was, they lied and did all this stuff, and I walked in, and there it was. Here's what happened. This actually surprised me, and I don't like these things, honestly. I get very uncomfortable in them and very awkward, but we had been, decades in the Philippines, and then people came up that we had led to the Lord, baptized, did their wedding, dedicated their kids, and, the whole deal. We've done life with for years. And they started standing up and saying nice things about me. But there was a theme that was just spontaneous. It was not orchestrated. And it was a theme of trust. And here's what I mean by that. One after another, I'll just paraphrase what they said. One after another, people stand up and say, you know what? When I was this, I was shocked because Steve trusted me to lead. Another guy, I went through this, and then I just couldn't believe it. Steve trusted me to be the worship leader. And he kept on saying that I trusted him. Here's what kind of was a little weird for me, because I thought, you know what? All these people are saying nice things, and nobody's talked about my great preaching. Nobody's mentioned one book I've written. I mean, if leadership is as simple as trusting people, it's not that complicated. But that really was what it came down to, is that I believed in them. The truth was, I didn't really believe in them. I believed in the Holy Spirit in them. I didn't tell them that, but I believed that the Holy Spirit living inside of that person could do something great. The other thing is, I just got tired of doing it all myself. But you trust your team. You don't micromanage. And there's a fine line, there's a very difficult line to find between empowering and just being irresponsible. Or micromanaging and being responsible. It's a tough one to find. But I try to err toward empowering. When in doubt, just empower. Part of our job as leaders is to fix what other people mess up. So if you over-empower and they do something dumb or, mess up something, then that's part of your job as a leader to go fix it. Make it a learning thing. But if there aren't any problems, it means probably we aren't empowering people enough. Empowered people create problems. They make bad decisions. They make messes, especially in churches. But it's better than the alternative. So trust your team. Trust them. Empower them. All right. Let's talk for 3 minutes. 3 minutes. What are the benefits and pitfalls of importing ready-made leaders? And what are the benefits and pitfalls of developing homegrown leaders? So we either have a model where we're looking for someone from the outside, hiring leaders. What are the benefits of that? What are the pitfalls of that? And then what are the benefits and pitfalls if we're going homegrown, starting pretty much from scratch with leaders? Okay, talk about that. 3 minutes. And then we're going to take a lunch break. Darren, are you there? Help.
Fantastic. Thank you, Pastor Steve. That was brilliant. Now we know how to think like a leader, act like a leader. Let's thank Pastor Steve. Fantastic. We are going to have some lunch. Thanks, everybody, for watching. We're going to take a 45-minute break. We're going to be back on schedule. 2:15, we'll be back here. We have we're going to get some instructions now on what we're going to do, but 45 minutes, so that should get us back in here by 2:15, okay? Lydia, tell us how we're going to eat, where, whatever. Have a great lunch break.
Okay, great. So it's pretty simple. If you are nut-free, vegan, lactose, or dairy-free, I can't remember the fourth one, please head out this door, and on the table straight in front of you are only those people are allowed those. Everybody else, down the middle here, you have chicken and bacon, chicken and mayo, ham and cheese. It's an amazing selection. Just grab a bag, look for the paper that says what they are, grab the bag, and parents, there is children's packs in the back. So everybody, bon appetit. Thank you.